I was elbow deep in a lab fridge trying to find a sample the interns had misfiled when I heard it. Ryan, outside my office, talking loud enough for the whole floor to hear. We've got too many cooks in the compliance kitchen, he chuckled. Let's start trimming the fat. Then a pause. Karen? Oh, she's legacy clutter. Sharp, but stuck in pre-IPO mode. I didn't flinch, not then. I just tucked the sample into a tray, walked back to my desk, and quietly logged that comment in a folder I'd named Insurance Against Idiots. Subfolder, Ryan. That folder was growing faster than our Series C fund. 3 years ago, I helped build this company out of duct tape, caffeine, and grant money nobody thought we'd qualify for. Now we had sleek headquarters, a subscription to a kombucha delivery service, and a CEO's son-in-law pretending he invented growth by renaming departments. Ryan strutted in 6 months ago, armed with a second-hand MBA and a first-rate superiority complex. His hiring had all the subtlety of a car crash. The founder, Tom, brought him in after semi-retiring to Montana. Just until things stabilized, Tom told me over lunch. That lunch cost more than my first car, and I paid for it. Now Ryan was streamlining, which was code for eliminating everyone who'd built the place before he showed up. I kept my head down. I always have. My name was on every major grant, the federal seed funds, the EU research grants, the Gates Foundation pilot. I wasn't flashy. I was irreplaceable. Only no one notices that until the walls start to crack. That's when the invitation came. Reykjavik, Global Summit on Biomedical Compliance and Innovation. Keynote speaker, me, not the company, me. The invitation was printed in 3 languages. My title underneath, named grant holder. USEU co-funded oncology research pilot. When I told Ryan, he raised an eyebrow so high I thought it would launch into orbit. You're what now? Speaking, I said. About our transatlantic compliance framework. Sounds like a junket, he muttered. You know we don't have budget for Icelandic sightseeing. I already confirmed, I said. They're covering my airfare and hotel. That's when he leaned back in his ergonomic chair like he owned the air around it and smiled. You don't get to approve travel anymore. That's under ops. And I say no. Now, before we go any further, if you've made it this far into my little descent into madness, and you're one of the 90% listening without subscribing, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and throw a like on this. It helps the team keep telling these stories, and trust me, it gets a whole lot better from here. Or worse, depending on who you're rooting for. Anyway, didn't argue with Ryan. That's how you lose. I just printed the itinerary, tucked it into my purse behind a folder marked EU Disbursement Protocol, and made a quiet note to log out of our HR portal just in case. The next few days were strange. I was still doing my job, managing millions in grant logistics, while Ryan pinged me with increasingly petty questions, like do you really need 3 sign-offs for fund allocations? Yes, Ryan. It's called oversight, welcome to adult supervision. Tom called me once during that week, just once. How's the new regime? He asked, half laughing. Efficient, I said, like a chainsaw in a flower shop, he sighed, just ride it out. You've got institutional memory. Funny, I said, that memory keeps getting deleted from the org chart. What I didn't tell Tom was that I'd already started transferring backups. Not data, my relationships, EU liaisons, NIH contacts, ethics board reps. I let them all know I'd be in Reykjavik, and that I'd be happy to discuss long-term continuity. Ryan thought he'd stopped me. He had no idea I'd already left. It happened on a Tuesday, the day the HVAC gave up and everyone pretended they weren't sweating through their synthetic blend blazers. I was halfway through a grant compliance crosswalk when Ryan popped his overgelled head into my office with a little too much glee. 5-minute huddle, conference room B, 5 minutes my ass. He waited until everyone filed in, most of them junior, wide-eyed, eager to look useful. No snacks, no agenda. Just Ryan with his hands folded like a game show host about to announce the losing contestant. So, he said, smiling, some of you may have heard about Karen's little trip. I didn't move, didn't speak. He clicked a remote. My headshot flashed on the screen behind him, pulled from our outdated company bio page. The summit logo was stamped in the corner. I didn't know whether to laugh or sue. This was not approved by operations, he continued. We don't do vanity projects. We're a lean, mean biotech machine now. No space for freeloaders or legacy overhead. Then he turned to me, just me. Karen, I don't approve junkets. You're fired. No warning, no write-up, no protocol. Just the blunt force trauma of public humiliation, delivered with the performative flair of a man who thinks being cruel is the same thing as being in charge. I looked at him. Is HR joining us? He waved his hand. Not necessary. You're done here. An email's going out. It's already been notified. I stood, straightened my blazer. That 1 second was the only thing that kept me from driving my heel into his foot. I walked out without another word. No drama. No tears, just silence. By the time I reached my desk, my badge was already dead. I tapped it once, twice. The reader blinked red. A junior associate looked away, suddenly very interested in her Excel spreadsheet that wasn't open. My inbox was gone, my access revoked. The all-staff email popped up on the monitors behind me as I packed my things. Subject line, organizational update. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. My office plant was dead. Took it anyway. The interns didn't say goodbye. One of them, Miguel, who I trained personally on NIH cost principles, gave me the saddest nod I've ever seen. like he was watching a ship sink in real time and knew he was next. On the elevator down, I finally let myself breathe, not cry, breathe. I walked to my car, got in, sat there. Fired. I repeated it out loud like it was a foreign word. Fired, not laid off, not restructured, not transitioned. Just fired. But what Ryan didn't know, and never cared to learn, was that I hadn't booked that summit flight through our internal travel system. I hadn't even put it on a credit card. I used points. A whole nest egg's worth of loyalty miles I'd been stockpiling since our scrappy phase I days, when I flew coach to every backwater compliance workshop in the lower 48. I'd saved them for something meaningful. This was it. I pulled up the airline app, checked in. Seat 3A, direct to Reykjavik. He could take my badge, my email, my parking spot, but he couldn't stop me from getting on that plane. I'd kept one hard copy folder in my bag, my designation as named grant holder under the EU co-funding framework, with a wet signature from a man 10 rungs above Ryan's pay grade. I looked at the folder, then out the windshield, and I started the car. The plan wasn't revenge. Not yet, it was survival. But somewhere in the quiet hum of the engine, I started to realize he just handed me a loaded weapon, and I intended to use it. The wind in Reykjavik felt like it was trying to slap the corporate ghosts off me the second I stepped outside the terminal. Cold, clean, unforgiving. I stood still for a moment on the curb, clutching my tote and trying to decide if I felt liberated or lost. Maybe both. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Not the summit coordinators, not the EU contacts. I wanted to see if the machine still recognized its own operator once she'd been ejected. At the hotel check-in, the young man behind the desk squinted at the monitor. "I'm sorry," he said, "we don't have a reservation under your company." I smiled politely. "Try my name." "Karen D. Teller." Click, click. A frown, still nothing. He looked up at me. "This summit mostly works through institutional credentials. Did your company send a delegation?" I reached into my bag and handed him a worn folder with the EU insignia stamped across the front. Inside, the original disbursement letter, my signed designation as named grant holder, and a laminated credential card from our last ethics audit, back when we were still begging for pennies and pretending our lab wasn't built in a glorified broom closet. His expression shifted the moment he scanned the letterhead. A blink, a recalibration, then a smile. "Ah, Miss Teller, of course. We have you in the delegate suite. Welcome to Reykjavik. Delegate suite, not staff, not assistant, not observer." I dropped my bag in the room, opened the curtains to a view of distant glaciers, and sat in the stillness. He fired me in front of junior staff like I was yesterday's printer paper. But out here, my name still opened doors. My name was the door. At the conference center, my badge waited at the registration desk. Name, photo, title. Not the company's logo, just mine, and beneath it, named grant holder. I wore it like armor. Over the next few hours, I shook hands with scientists I'd only ever emailed, funders who'd approved our initial proposals, and ethics board reps who remembered my 3 a.m. calls chasing down missing disclosures. One of the EU liaisons clasped my hand warmly. "Karen, so good to finally meet you. Without you, the disbursement wouldn't have passed ethics. Your protocol addendum on familial conflict, genius." I nodded like it was no big deal. But inside, that comment lit something up in me that had been snuffed out by 6 months of Ryan's smirks. They remembered, they knew. Meanwhile, back at HQ, 10 o'clock a.m. EST, Ryan was giving his quarterly update to the board. "We've gone lean," he was saying. "Dead weight is gone. Compliance is now centralized under ops. We're saving 6 figures per quarter just on personnel." The founder, zoomed in from a ski lodge, grunted something vaguely approving. The board members nodded. Nobody asked a question. Nobody wondered how the grants kept flowing or who, exactly, had built the relationships that now looked so self-sustaining. Because that's the thing about good infrastructure, it disappears until it fails. I stood at a reception that evening, sipping something fizzy with licorice in it, when one of the Swiss delegates leaned in and asked, "Where's your CEO? Isn't he presenting tomorrow?" I smiled. He had a scheduling conflict. I didn't correct the title, I didn't need to. My panel was scheduled for tomorrow, second day of the summit, but I already felt the current shifting. Every conversation, every nod, every Karen, right? "I've read your audit paper." It all reinforced the same truth. Ryan thought he'd erased me. But you can't delete a name carved into the funding pipeline. And the pipeline? It still flowed through me. The summit opened with the kind of polished chaos only academics and bureaucrats could orchestrate, badge scanners malfunctioning, half the panelists lost in translation, and a keynote speaker from Belgium whose opening joke about fungal trials fell painfully flat in 3 languages. I blended in easily. No title flashing, no name dropping. Just quiet presence the way I'd always preferred. Let the loud ones burn out early. I'd speak when it mattered. Day 1 was all panels and pleasantries. I was seated with a group from the European Medicines Agency, a Canadian ethics officer, and a Norwegian delegate whose entire department had been gutted last year in a compliance scandal. She leaned over halfway through a session and said, "You still with that company? The one with the founder who wore bolo ties?" I hesitated. Technically, no. She nodded like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Ryan was making moves. He'd been busy scrubbing. I know this because at 2:43 a.m. Reykjavik time, my phone lit up with a string of forwarded error reports from our EU compliance portal. The system was flagging inconsistencies, references to a Karen D. Teller as named grant holder were missing from critical fields that couldn't legally be empty. Someone, Ryan, had tried to replace my name with a generic compliance office alias. The system didn't just reject it, it started an audit chain. I smiled into the darkness of my hotel room, the light of the screen casting shadows on the ceiling. He was panicking. There's a kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've laid traps by simply doing your job right the first time. Every I dotted, every T crossed, every clause referenced with footnotes. But I also knew Ryan wasn't alone in his delusions. The board was still asleep at the wheel, drunk on growth charts and his buzzword-laced nonsense. They wouldn't intervene yet, unless someone with actual power raised a hand. That someone was the lead investor. A silent, spectral presence in most meetings. Big money, bigger influence. And I'd heard whispers at the summit welcome dinner he was watching, not just the conference, but me. Apparently he'd been sent a link to the live stream. One of his associates had flagged the name Karen Teller on the day 2 keynote. That name matched the one on the EU disbursement. And the name Ryan had just tried to delete, so I did something I don't normally do. I acted first. No cover letter. No apology, just one email. Subject line, Clause 14. Attachment, a single-page PDF screenshot of the EU grant agreement. Highlighted section, disbursement requires ongoing authorization by the named grant holder NGH. NGH may not be substituted without written consent from funding body. In other words, fire me, lose the funds. I sent it directly to the lead investor's private email. No message, no context. Just the clause, a chess player doesn't narrate her next move. She slides the piece forward and watches the tremor ripple down the board. And ripple it did. Because just before I went to sleep, I got a read receipt. Opened in New York, 2 minutes after I sent it. And then, another forward, this one from a friend still at the company, a former lab tech who owed me more favors than I could count. Ryan had scheduled a board call the next morning. Emergency restructuring update. No mention of me. No idea I was about to be projected on their screens at full resolution, speaking to a global audience under a spotlight he thought he'd turned off for good. Let him come. Let him spin. Tomorrow I'd walk on stage. And the one name they couldn't scrub from the record would be lit up behind me like a flare dropped in gasoline. My name, not the company's. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel expendable. I felt inevitable. The stage was smaller than I'd imagined, low, narrow, framed by 2 oversized LED screens, and a backdrop that looked like it came from an IKEA apocalypse. But when the lights dimmed and my name lit up behind me, Karen D. Teller named grant holder, USEU Oncology Initiative, it didn't feel small. It felt surgical. I didn't think about Ryan, or Tom, or the interns who couldn't look me in the eye as I packed my desk. I thought about the 2 a.m. edits to protocols, the ethics board calls across 3 time zones, the night I hand-delivered documents to a grant office in Brussels because our courier service dropped the ball. This wasn't a speech, it was a reclamation. I stepped up to the podium and said, when we talk about compliance, we're not just talking about rules. We're talking about trust. And the people who hold it, they listened, really listened. I walked them through our framework. Messy start, the regulatory hurdles, the cross-border harmonization efforts that nearly collapsed twice but didn't because I caught the gaps before anyone else even noticed them. And I never once said the company's name. Only the project name, the ethics body, the research itself, and me, the one who'd shepherded it from theory to funding to impact. Midway through, someone from the back began snapping photos. Not obnoxious, just fast. My badge was visible. So was the screen behind me. By the time I stepped off stage to a polite but firm applause, those screenshots were already flying across biotech Twitter, compliance forums, and Slack channels from here to Singapore. I didn't know it yet, but back at headquarters, the real show was beginning. An email landed in the board's shared inbox. Subject, clarification request active grant holder designation. It came from the investor's office. The message was brief. Too brief. Please confirm the status of Miss Karen Teller within the organizational structure. We are reviewing the disbursement schedule in light of her public representation at the EU summit. That email hit inboxes like a dropped scalpel in an operating room. But Ryan, he wasn't in that inbox. He'd taken himself out of most of the board threads, fancying himself too important for reply-all peasantry. Someone forwarded it to him. His response? She went rogue. Handling it, short, confident, arrogant. He didn't know. He didn't know that the lead investor had embedded the summit live stream into his dashboard. That while Ryan typed his brush off, the investor was watching the full keynote. Watching me, my badge, my title, my message. He didn't know that compliance officers from 6 countries were retweeting my panel quote, "If your infrastructure depends on one person and you fire her, you never had infrastructure." You had a countdown. He didn't know the fund's legal team had already pulled the original grant agreement from archives. They were circling the named grant holder clause like vultures over a carcass. He thought this was a PR glitch, a noise problem, something he could handle. But I'd stopped being his employee the moment he stripped my badge. And now, I wasn't just a name in a clause, I was the clause. As I left the conference hall, a soft ping echoed from my phone. Direct message on LinkedIn from one of the EU compliance officers. You nailed it. Proud to see your name where it belongs. We're watching the replay in Brussels. Then another. Your keynote was fire. If they let you go, they're already bleeding. And then the last one, just curious, who did sign off on your termination? I stared at that message. Let it sit on my screen like an unopened wound. Because that question wasn't rhetorical. It was procedural. And Ryan. He just activated the part of the grant agreement he never even read. Tomorrow, they'd feel it. But tonight I would sleep, not victorious, not vengeful, just whole, for the first time in a very, very long time. The board meeting began the way most of them had since Ryan took over, an aggressive PowerPoint deck, too many buzzwords, and zero substance. He opened with a self-congratulatory nod to streamlining initiatives and talent recalibration, which, on corporate speak, meant he fired people who didn't flatter him. His new org chart flashed on the screen, color-coded, reshuffled, freshly sanitized. My name was nowhere, not in dotted lines, not in legacy roles, not even in footnotes. The founder, Tom, zoomed in from what looked like a sunlit balcony in Pravas. Shirt unbuttoned, drink sweating in hand, barely listening. The call was a formality to him now. A shareholder box to check before the wine tour resumed. Ryan kept talking, voice confident, hands slicing the air like he was conducting a TED talk no one wanted. We've removed redundancy across compliance functions and folded them under a central ops authority, he said, gesturing to a blank rectangle labeled regulatory interface. That rectangle used to be me. Then someone interrupted. A new tile appeared in the video call grid. It blinked to life slowly, like a shadow growing a face. The lead investor. No assistant, no preamble. Just him. Everyone stiffened. Even Tom sat up straighter. The drink went off camera. And then the investor shared his screen. It was a live stream. My keynote, still in progress. There I was, on a panel with EU officials and research ethics leaders, calmly fielding a question about cross-jurisdictional compliance. My badge clearly visible, my title hanging above me on the stage in crystal-clear Helvetica, named grant holder USEU Oncology Initiative. The investor didn't say anything at first, just let the footage roll. The audio filled the conference room, my voice steady and sure. Then he muted it and spoke. I'm looking, he said, at our named grant holder right now. The air got still. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Then came the question, delivered without inflection, without urgency. Who authorized her termination? Nobody moved. Ryan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Tom finally leaned in, the charm slipping from his face. Wait, she's in Iceland? The investor nodded slowly, giving a keynote, representing your company or perhaps not your company anymore. I'm unclear. Ryan scrambled. She went rogue. We had to reassign. The investor cut him off. Not with words, with silence. He just stared, and stared, and stared. That kind of silence is its own language. It says, you failed to read what mattered. It says, you gambled with capital that wasn't yours. It says, we're not going to fix your mistake. We're going to replace you for it. The founder finally cleared his throat, his vacation face cracking. We'll sort this out. The investor didn't even look at him. He closed the live stream window. Funding drawdown is contingent on named holder status being active and uncontested, he said flatly. We'll be pausing transfers until this is clarified. Clarified, not resolved, not negotiated. That word hit harder than any accusation. It meant they'd been caught operating outside of compliance. It meant oversight had just become spotlight. The call ended without a goodbye, just a screen going black. Ryan sat back, color draining from his face, trying to understand what just happened. What happened, Ryan, is that you fired the only person holding the legal key to your lifeline. And now she's on stage, smiling slightly as the applause builds and the camera pans wide. Not because she needed revenge, but because she was always the center of the map. You just colored her out of it, and now the map doesn't work. The call came at 6:04 a.m., Reykjavik time, not my cell, hotel landline. The kind of call that slices through a dark room like a scalpel. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up and said nothing. Miss Teller, said a voice I recognized immediately. Tom's chief of staff, a man who used to ignore my emails until I looped in funders. The board has convened a closed session. The investor has issued a temporary freeze on drawdown. They're requesting an immediate path to reinstatement. Translation: Ryan broke something he doesn't know how to fix, and now they need the woman he erased. I said nothing. He filled the silence. Legal has advised us that terminating the named grant holder without procedural review triggers an automatic breach of grant conditions. There may also be clawback clauses. His voice trailed off into the kind of bureaucratic dread that smells like coffee breath in lawsuits. Then came the offer. Would you be willing to discuss a transition plan? Not return, not forgiveness, just a transaction. I let it hang for a moment, watching the early light stretch across the glacier outside my window. I'm speaking at 2 more panels this week, I said. Call back next week. No tone, no venom, just boundary. He hesitated as if waiting for me to say more. I didn't. I hung up. I went downstairs, grabbed a croissant the size of a hamster, and walked into the conference center. The badge scanner pinged, this time with a new designation. Special delegate. Someone had updated it overnight. Not just a speaker now, recognized authority. I was barely inside the main hall when one of the EU compliance officers flagged me down, smiling. Karen, excellent keynote. We just added you on LinkedIn, hope that's okay. She wasn't alone. 3 others waved from a table, motioning me over. It wasn't heroes welcome. It was something quieter, deeper. Respect from people who understand what it costs to hold the line. Back home, Ryan wasn't on the next call. He'd been locked out of the board portal. Legal had advised the founder to limit exposure. Translation, Ryan's mouth was now a liability. Tom, for the first time in months, showed up in person, tan fading, vacation voice replaced with his old cadence, the one he used back when we were eating dry bagels in a windowless lab, betting the farm on a phase I approval. He looked tired, older, real. An emergency meeting was called. Just Tom, legal. One board liaison. No slides, no charts. Just a printout of the grant agreement, clause 14 circled in red, initialed by me, notarized by the EU 2 years ago. Legal's conclusion, funding void unless reinstated, prior approvals null without named holder signature, new disbursement schedule contingent on remedy and acknowledgement of breach. Tom rubbed his temples. She's not going to come back, is she? Legal shrugged. She already is. Just not to you. Meanwhile, I sat at a panel titled Ethics in Crisis. Who holds the line? The irony wasn't lost on me. I told the story, not the drama, just the logistics. How integrity isn't about grand gestures but relentless small ones. A funder approached me after, quietly. We're revisiting how we structure ownership in future grants. You may have just changed the model. I nodded. No gloating, just knowing. Back at the hotel. Another message slid into my inbox. Subject, Summit recap from EU Liaison Office. We'd like to discuss a long-term advisory role if your current commitments allow. Independent, high autonomy. We believe compliance works best when the architects are empowered, not buried. I closed the laptop. Outside, the northern lights were just beginning to move, quiet, unapologetic, and unstoppable. Just like me. When I landed back in the States, my phone exploded, not with apologies, not with "we made a mistake" or "let's talk." No, that would require ownership, something Ryan and his handlers had surgically removed from their vocabulary. Instead, there were euphemisms. A press release from the company homepage. We thank Karen Teller for her continued leadership in global grant coordination and regulatory compliance. Her contributions remain foundational to our success. Continued leadership. As if they hadn't disabled my badge and erased me from the org chart 2 weeks ago. As if firing me in a glass-walled room in front of 2 interns had been some kind of creative retreat. But the real signal came buried in a quiet Friday email to staff. Subject line, organizational realignment. 2 lines down, effective immediately. Ryan B. is on administrative leave pending internal review. No fanfare, no farewell, just vanished. The founder, now thoroughly debriefed by lawyers and funders, had finally decided to stop pretending family appointments were strategic genius. Internally, the place was a mess. The grants folder, my grants folder, had gone dark the minute they terminated my access. The documentation wasn't lost, but it was labyrinthine. They couldn't find the original ethical waivers, the cross-border subrecipient maps, or the amendments I negotiated in Brussels over lukewarm hotel espresso. Because here's the truth they never grasped. I didn't hoard knowledge, I was the knowledge. The renewal filings were due in 10 business days, and I wasn't picking up the phone. Instead, I unpacked my suitcase. Set the folder from the EU summit on my dining room table, changed into sweatpants. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Flowers, not the generic kind HR sends after a gallbladder surgery. These were purposeful, peonies and eucalyptus wrapped in pale blue tissue. With a real ribbon, no card on the front. Just a sealed envelope tucked deep between the stems. I opened it. Handwritten, ink not printer. Sometimes the grant funds the right person, not the right company. Board of Trustees, EU Oncology Initiative. I sat down. For the first time in weeks, I actually sat without checking emails, strategizing, bracing for impact. And I smiled, because they saw it. Not the performance, not the speech, but the work. The spine beneath the logo. I'd spent years believing I was just another functional cog in a growing machine. Replaceable, adaptable, safe so long as I stayed useful. But standing on that stage in Reykjavik, as those cameras rolled and my badge caught the spotlight, I'd felt it click into place. I wasn't at the center. I was the center. They tried to replace me with an org chart. They forgot that funding flows through people, through trust, through the name on the line that says authorized. Later that night, I opened my laptop. One new email. From EU Liaison Office at Junket. Subject. Ongoing collaboration discussion. Karen, we'd like to schedule time next week to explore a more permanent role on our side. Independent oversight, high autonomy. The board feels this structure protects both our grants and our principles. Let us know when you're ready. I stared at it, then closed the laptop, because I already knew my answer. But it would wait. Let the company stew in their scramble a little longer. Let them learn what happens when you treat the keystone like dead weight. This wasn't a return, not really. It was a quiet coronation. And I had earned every petal, every pause, every unread message in their outbox labeled urgent reinstate, Let them wait, I sure did. The summit was held in the kind of sterile hotel conference room where billion-dollar decisions get made between half-drunk coffees and meatless sandwiches. The founder sat at the head of the table, his Montana tan fading under fluorescent lights, flipping through a stack of briefing papers like they were receipts from a failed vacation. He was there to renegotiate, to plead if he had to. The grant funds had been frozen for a full week. The investors weren't returning his calls. Legal had stopped sugarcoating the fallout. Without reinstatement of named holder status, the funding architecture was dead on arrival. No one mentioned Ryan. He was a ghost now. His keycard had quietly expired the same day the board received a 5-paragraph memo from the fund's legal team titled Noncompliance Breach Timeline. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just a digital obituary in the access logs. The room was silent when the door opened. Lead investor entered, unhurried, calm, with the kind of presence that makes executives sit straighter and consultants reach for their water. And behind him, me. I walked in wearing the same gray blazer they'd once described as too serious for culture meetings. This time it felt like armor. The founder blinked. Karen, I nodded, didn't sit. The investor placed his phone face down on the table and said, "We'd like to propose a change." He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The next tranche, he continued, will not go to your company. It will be redirected to a new lab, independent, formed under her name. He turned to me, then stepped back. The floor was mine. I placed a binder on the table. It landed with the kind of soft thud that makes people flinch. I've already secured space, I said. A partnership incubator with built-in audit trails and infrastructure support from 2 academic hospitals. Open the binder slowly. Most of the original researchers want to come. I'm offering them full transparency, salary parity, and co-authorship on all outputs. No ghost labor, no legacy overhead. Someone coughed. The founder looked down at the binder, then stopped. 'Cause on top, nestled in clear plastic, was a letter. His name at the top, the board's letterhead above it. Subject, termination for cause. The air left the room like it had been punched. He looked up at the investor, eyes wide. This is real? The investor simply nodded. The board voted unanimously. You authorized a termination that voided our compliance. You then failed to disclose the impact, misrepresented internal capabilities, and nearly triggered clawbacks from 3 continents. This isn't punishment, he added, it's preservation. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply stood, meeting his eyes. You built something important, I said. And then you let a child burn it for sport. He tried to speak, tried to summon one of his old, charming rebuttals, but nothing came out, just the slow realization that the room didn't belong to him anymore. I picked up the binder, closed it gently. As of next quarter, the investor said, the funds, staff, and research will transfer to the new entity. Effective immediately, Karen Teller is the sole compliance authority. I turned to leave. The investor followed. No goodbyes, no round of applause, just the quiet click of power being reassigned. Outside, the light was sharp, cold, clean. My phone buzzed, a welcome message from the new lab's IT director. Credentials activated. The signature block read, Founder, Teller Research Group. And just like that, I wasn't returning. I had already arrived. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.